The other guy that I want to talk about is Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, obviously, the other day I hopped on Commanders Reddit because I was like, how are they feeling when Ben Johnson said he wanted to stay? Like, I just want to see this poor embattled fan base, albeit with Josh Harris at the helm now. Like, you're what the fuck, dude? We got to draft a quarterback. We're gonna have a defensive head coach. People are freaking out about Dan Quinn. I just want to say this: what's impressive about Dan Quinn? Firstly, 28-3, depending on how you look at it, it's the biggest failure, or it's also like kind of impressive. Like, that team I was on was really good. They were up 28-3 on us. He got that team ready to play, and with under 4 minutes, or about 4 minutes ago, they're up 8, and they have a chance to win that game. And like, I could look at Dan Quinn. He should be walking over in that situation to Kyle Shanahan and saying, "Hey, motherfucker, we're running the football." And maybe that's the lesson he learned. And I'm sure that conversation has come up in head coaching interviews since. But I don't put all of it on him. I put part of it on him. I don't look at him as not being viable because of that situation. Like, for the simple fact that, hey, the other guy that blew that lead is in the Super Bowl this week. So, like, blowing a lead on a big stage as a head coach in the NFL or a coordinator, it's not a death sentence. And I think he's probably learned from it, but also look at it from the standpoint of, like, it's also pretty impressive to jump Bill Belichick in a Super Bowl like that. Have you ever seen that happen in any of the other Super Bowls they were in? Now, they couldn't hold the lead, and the players on the field made plays. Dan Quinn didn't blow a protection when Dante Hightower came in unblocked. Okay, Dan Quinn, didn't get beat for a sack by Trey Flowers. Dan Quinn didn't do a lot of that stuff in the second half. Like, the players have to make plays. But I'm just saying, I don't hold that whole thing against him. What you're looking at is a guy who was this close to beating Bill Belichick in a Super Bowl. And I know close, horseshoes, hand grenades, but he might get another opportunity and he might be way better prepared. And that would be pretty good. And I look at Dan Quinn and I say, the thing that impressed me the most looking back at his time in Atlanta was, look at this staff. Don't look any further than Kyle Shanahan, because when he hired Kyle Shanahan, he wasn't Kyle Shanahan. He was not a hot commodity. Their offense was not that good in Cleveland. And, it was probably a head scratcher for some people. I don't want to do revisionist history here, but I don't feel like that was a hot name. You've got one head coach on your staff. You've got Raheem Morris on your staff. He's now a head coach. You had LaFleur on your staff. He's a head coach. You had LaFleur's brother. You had McDaniel, head coach now. Jeff Ulbrich on your staff. Jeff Ulbrich probably gets more looks in this cycle if it's not for that team being so shitty. Right? Because they were really good, like third in EPA per play up in New York. That's really tough to do. I mean, and so by the way, Manuel just got an interview with Jacksonville. He's not going to get the job, but that's another dude he had on his staff. So there's a ton of great coaches that he brought on that staff. And a few of them were not who they are now. And so I'm not saying he has a tree, but it's pretty cool that he assembled this staff in Atlanta, and I think there is some intentionality about that, and he didn't do it on accident. So he was this close. He's also really into shooting foul shots before meetings, that whole Pete Carroll thing. I know Bob Myers had a lot to do with this hire, right? The GM of the Warriors, right? Josh Harris is like, I need a basketball guy. That makes a lot of sense. This guy likes to shoot free throws before the fucking meeting. So never been to a team, though, never coached on a team where they had to make a decision like this, and I think that's the unique thing is when he was in Seattle and they made the turn to Russ, like, I don't remember if he was there when they drafted Russ. I believe he was. He was there when they drafted Russ. They didn't have to do what they have to do now. And as much as Caleb Williams might draw a comparison to Russ, in some ways, I know people are doing the lazy Mahomes thing, but say you looked at it like, hey, there's a Russ thing. We can win with a Russ type guy. Whatever you think of his mental makeup relative to Russell Wilson, it's all the same, though. They didn't draft in the top 5. That guy fell to them. So this is uncharted territory for him on that hand. I also think what's interesting about this is the GM came from San Francisco. Sharp guy. Everybody likes this guy. When you draft in the West Coast system, you think about the system that these guys are playing in, right? Like those are the guys that he's come up over the last 5 to 6 years. The GM from San Francisco, Peters, I think his name, Adam Peters. Who you said is good looking.
Yeah, he's handsome.
Good looking guy. He's used to West Coast offense personnel offensively. Now, I'm not saying like guys can't play in a West Coast offense and vice versa, but he comes from that school of thought, even as a personnel guy. And Dan Quinn, where he had a lot of success in Atlanta, was Shanahan. And so when I look at Eric Bieniemy, I wonder how he factors in, because Eric, I think, and he's one of these guys whose name has cooled off a little bit. He was a really hot name, and I didn't hear about him in this cycle. Even with the first half of the season, the way it went for them offensively, I think the second half didn't go as well. So maybe he cooled off in that way. But are you going to pick a West Coast guy offensively to run the show? I'm not sure, but I look at that and I say, hey, maybe reading the tea leaves, the successes that Adam Peters had and the successes that Dan Quinn has had has been with an offense and a system that is more West Coast. So a lot of excitement. There are some questions. 9 picks and $70+ million in cap space with 6 in the top 102 picks. And I think this is something that gets lost on some people. He knows Dallas. Like, he knows Dallas in the short term. As long as McCarthy's there, he learned a lot about what McCarthy likes. If Dak's still there, he knows Dak. If the pieces are still there, he knows that. So that's a bonus. I'm not saying that's why you hire him, but that's a bonus.
As a Giants fan,
yeah,
I love it.
You love it.
And I think that says something. It's scary when you're going to pair a guy, Adam Peters, highly respected, with the young, modern, cutting-edge offensive mind. And you thought Ben Johnson to Washington was,
it would be a little
was
scary.
going to happen.
I can see that being scary.
And the older coach, who's retread, is just, it's not as scary,
not as terrifying,
to put it lightly. And I think a lot of maybe not great coaches have almost won Super Bowls. I think a lot of not very great coaches have won Super Bowls. Mike McCarthy, speaking of,
but how many of them played Bill Belichick and went up 28-3?
Yeah,
who are the guys you're talking about?
Not very good coaches.
Yeah, that almost won Super Bowls.
Mike McCarthy won one.
Right.
Barry Switzer won one.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Kubiak, won one.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, it's not just he almost won a Super Bowl.
No question.
Therefore, he's a great hire.
McCarthy had Rodgers. Kubiak had Manning.
And I know,
an elite defense.
I know you already said it, and I would say Dan Quinn had Kyle Shanahan. And I mean,
you could say, we could do it,
but
the point is too, like when you're talking about a guy that like Atlanta came out of nowhere, they're not out of nowhere, but he built that thing. Like I know they had Matt Ryan and he existed and the whole thing, but 28-3 up in that game. I'm not saying it's automatically going to work out because he's been close to winning a Super Bowl, but relative to some of the unknowns, like this guy at least has a floor where, hey, the year after the Super Bowl, they still got back to the dance. I mean, a lot of coaches can't say that. They got back to the dance and lost to us in the wild card round. So they lost to the Super Bowl champions the next year. 2 years in a row, they lose to the Super Bowl champions. I'm not making excuses for the guy. All I'll say is, like, I like having some floor that I can identify.
You know how after the breakup you date the opposite gal?
Yeah.
This just feels somewhat close to a Ron Rivera hire.
Golly, I think there's a difference between Dan and Ron, but I hear you. I mean, it's the same thing with, at least the McDonald hire is way different in age, right? So kind of like
young McDonald. Did you hear
I did hear the young McDonald.
The ditty?
You got one for Washington?
Not yet. No.
I thought with
Q-U-I-N-N.
I thought Washington would go a little bit younger and a little bit more vibrant, maybe you could say, because of the new ownership and. But it looks like guys like playing for Dan. That defense like playing for him. And
got the hat.
Micah Parsons loves him, so you follow him wherever he goes. Now we'll see about that. But
he did. Jahan Dotson responded to that post and said, "Hey, maybe come be a commander.
I got a spare bedroom.
Yep, and
I'll give you my main bedroom. I'll stay in the spare bedroom."
Micah Parsons posted a picture of him sacking Sam Howell
this
year.
Yeah.
It's just like, maybe.
Yeah, maybe not. I also like sacking Sam Howell. And from the Dallas end of things, we should look at that, but go ahead.
You're not going to like it. So maybe we should stick with the Dallas end of things.
Let's stick with the Dallas end of things. Okay, so for the Dallas end of things, I think it's interesting because they could call up like their passing coordinator, Al Harris, who's been a hot name, and I love Al. But also, if you're Mike McCarthy and you're going into your last year, of your contract with everything swirling around you. Like, do you really want to hire a rookie defensive coordinator? The last three, I think, were all former head coaches. So these are all guys who have been head coaches, not necessarily all successful head coaches, but they're guys who have been head coaches. So I kind of wonder, is a Zimmer possible, or a Vrabel? I'd hate
Brandon Staley.
Or Brandon Staley. I think Brandon
Bill
Staley
Belichick.
would be Belichick. If you really think he's going to deal with the circus down there and being a defensive coordinator, I would love to see it.
If he would take the job, I think you would do it.
Oh, you would do it if you would take the job in a heartbeat, but also I've always said, like, defensive coordinators who get fired as head coaches actually perform pretty well. I know you got the Matt Patricia counterexample. I'll ask for some more. But there is a long list of good coordinators in the league right now who got fired as head coaches and came back and called good defense. And so fucking Brandon Staley, the way we think of him as this cartoonish head coach, that's not going to be who he's going to be if you hire him again. I mean, Spags had a really hard time as a head coach. Not all his fault. Now, he's been a mainstay in Kansas City. I mean, like, one of the best defensive coordinators of our generation. And also speaks to the variability of having the pieces, because when you look at Spags, he's also been in New Orleans where they had a historically bad run. So it's hard to pin these things down, but I would say I bet they lean experience if history tells you anything, but who knows? I don't know how much they love Al Harris, or somebody like that.
Wouldn't giving a former head coach the DC position make McCarthy's job harder, because he has Jerry has a I could go with this guy next year.
That's the problem. I mean, I don't know how big of a problem it is, because I think if shit hits the fan, he's probably getting fired anyway. So it doesn't matter if the guy's in the building or somewhere else. But it does give you, if you hire a retread head coach to be the defensive coordinator, Jerry has a contingency plan to finish a season that's not going great.
Right. If it's Vrabel and you're 2-4, Vrabel's the interim. The rest
Vrabel
of the way.
is the you don't want your friends to be too hot, right? It's just if Vrabel comes in, Vrabel's that hot friend. And Vrabel's got magnetism.
You see him palling around with Dak
Yes.
after the game, and Mike's like, wait a minute.
Yes, exactly. Zimmer, maybe less so, because you don't think about Zimmer as like a hot name right now to be a head coach. We've kind of seen that movie. But either way, pretty interesting. These two hires, defensive head coaches, save the best for last, right? It was all offense until this little stretch.